Hello. This is Jonathan, and you're listening to the Johnny Talks podcast, the place where we help you achieve your financial goals. Hola, amigos. Hope you're having a great day wherever you are. And if you're a new listener to the show, special warm welcome to you. I really appreciate you tuning into the show. And if you're a returning listener, welcome back. I appreciate it even more. In today's episode, we will speak to my friend Doug Nordman, also known as Nords, and his daughter Carol Pittner. We connected through the FinCon community as Doug is quite active there. Both of them have had military careers as Navy officers. Well, actually, Carol is a reservist at the moment. And Doug has retired in 2002 at age 41. Carol is currently in her late 20s, and she's already rapidly approaching financial independence as well. We will discuss what it feels like to be retired at a young age, how Doug worked his way towards financial independence before the FIRE movement even was a thing. We will exchange both interesting and fun anecdotes with Carol on how it was to grow up in a money-savvy environment. So topics today will include frugality, financial independence, financial literacy throughout childhood, investing in the stock markets through various recessions, and so on and so on. So all in all, it will be a lot of valuable information for you, all brought to you in an easy-to-understand conversation. And even though I do not have kids myself, I really like the topic of teaching kids about money, because to me, childhood is where your core beliefs and thoughts about money, and actually other topics, are shaped. So it all starts from there. And I really enjoyed the conversation with Doug and Carol and enjoyed their complicity. It made the conversation extra nice. This episode is for you. If you're wondering what it feels like to retire early, we've talked about the FIRE movement on the podcast, and we've had people wanting to reach FIRE or well on their way there. But now we have someone actually that has retired early for already 18 years. So this episode is a great opportunity to listen to what it looks like, what the motivation was, and what's the current lifestyle. And this episode is as well for you. If you're a young parent wanting to teach your kids to become money savvy as well. So without further ado, let's hear the interview. Hello, Doug and Carol. How are you doing today?
Hello, John. It's good to talk to you.
And I'm doing well too. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing fine here. It's evening time here in Luxembourg in Europe. What time is it where you are, guys?
Well, it's 7 a.m. here and another beautiful day in Hawaii.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Not as beautiful in California, but it is 10 a.m. here.
10 a.m. Well, thanks for connecting. It's great to speak to you, even with a 12-hour difference. I don't think I had a guest with that long, how can I say, the
time difference.
Time difference, yeah.
It's halfway around the globe, and it happens a lot out here.
Yeah, crazy. And Doug and Carol, Doug, you're Carol's father, and you wrote a book together that is published around these times, Raising Your Money Savvy Family for the Next Generation Financial Independence. And is it just released, or will it be released?
Well, we just finished the editing process, and now we're into the cover design and formatting the book for print and for ebook. Carol and I are also doing the recording for the audiobook. We each have our own individual sections of the book. We go back and forth in the narrative. So the the audiobook editor has to stitch together, I don't know what, Carol, probably 50 or 60 individual sections to get one audiobook out of it.
Give or take.
We look like we think we're going to publish here in about 2 months. It'll probably be late May, early June.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll talk about it more in details at the end of the show.
Yeah.
And Carol and Doug, one of the reasons I invited you on the podcast is because, Doug, you've been already retired for 17, 18 years now.
Yep.
You retired at age 41 in 2002. So that's quite unconventional. And Carol, you are in your late 20s and you're about to retire as well very soon. I don't know when is the plan or how the math plays out for you. When do you think you're going to retire?
So technically, we've already reached lean fi. So technically, we're already at the very minimum that we could get by with life. But my husband, he's also in the military. We were both Navy. And for him, there's a couple more things that he wants to do first. So there's one more duty station, maybe 2 more duty stations we want to do first. Mm-hmm. And so we already have 5. We're capable of going out and living on our own, but we're not quite ready to go there for other reasons yet.
Well, That's impressive. And Doug, back to you, because the thing is, on the podcast, we've had a few guests talking about the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early, for the listeners. And most of the guests, they are in their late 30s and they just enter the FIRE. Enter the early retirement, or some are in the late 20s as well, a bit like you, Carol. And
impressive.
they are working hard on it, or maybe they will get it within 1 or 2 years. So I haven't heard an experience of what it is to be retired early at 41. And what people do, during their days.
What do you do all day?
Yeah, what do you do all day?
That's the question. Well, some people have no reason to stop working. So we talk about financial independence, and we would talk about retiring early, but sometimes people are just talking about retiring early because what they really want to do is change to a different job or change to a different quality of life and make their lives better. When I reached 20 years of active duty in the U.S. Navy, I knew that I could do another career, but I wanted to spend more time with family, and I wanted to have a better quality of life. It was a lot of work during the active duty days, and I was ready for a break. So it's been 18 years, and I've been chronically unemployed, but actually I've found plenty to do. And in Carol's position, if her spouse is having fun, if the job that he's got is challenging and fulfilling, just like we were 30 years ago when we were at that Monterey Naval Postgraduate School, I'd keep going. I'd stick around for another tour of active duty. Mm-hmm. But life here in financial independence with retirement in Hawaii and surfing and all the other nice things that we get to do, I'm quite happy. And the question that a lot of people have is, well, what do you do all day? Are you bored yet? You can't possibly surf all day, every day. I can try. But the answer is that you have to retire to something. When you stop working for a paycheck, you have to design your own life. You're responsible for your own time. You're responsible for your own entertainment. And I feel like every day I've got all these things I want to do, and I really only get half of them done. That sounds trite, but there's always plenty to do, and haven't had any boredom yet. I don't see it happening.
Okay, that's good. And one question to you, Doug. Because you mentioned a fulfilling career, etc. Were you not fulfilled as a Navy officer?
Well, I did 20 years of active duty, and the first 10 years were great, challenging and fulfilling. Had a couple of good submarine tours, did a lot of good things that we don't discuss in the U.S. Submarine Force, but a lot of good things. And it was very enjoyable. The change was in 1992 when we started our family. And shortly, Carol's looking back on that. You were there. But the issue was that I wanted to spend more time with family. I wanted a better quality of life. And starting a family, my priorities just completely changed over. I'd never been a parent before, and it was fascinating. It was difficult. It was challenging. It was time consuming. There wasn't much sleep. But I wanted to spend more time and do more of that. And that was difficult to combine with being on active duty in the Navy. For people who are contemplating a career like that, where it's a long work week, a very intense time, and long days, I would say that if you can find a way to cut back, find a way to go part-time, that way you can get most of the good things and less of the sucky parts. In the U.S. military, for example, one way to do that would be to leave active duty and go to the reserves. You're essentially still in the military, but you're only doing maybe 1 weekend a month and a couple of weeks a year.
Okay, very good. And what is your what do you want to retire to, actually, Carol? Is it the same for your family? You just had a daughter.
Mm-hmm. And so that's really the big thing. It's just like that. I've only done 5 years of active duty. My first tour, that was a lot of fun. My second tour, there were goods and there were bads. And I got to the point where, my husband and I, we've been married at that point for several years, and we wanted to start our family. There's no time like your 20s to start your family. And we had that feeling that we're just like, well, he really likes his job. He got this great offer to go to Naval Postgraduate School here in Monterey. But for me, there's going to be a couple of drug deals, so to speak. I was going to have to do either a job I didn't want to do, or I was going to have to go and live elsewhere for a while, and I didn't want to do that. And then, in addition, there were some jobs I just wasn't interested in doing at all. And so I did exactly what Dad mentioned. I decided that I just wanted to step down from active duty and go into the reserves. And so that's actually what I'm doing out here in Monterey is I'm part of a reserve unit, and I do the weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. And so when it came to retirement, it wasn't necessarily retirement that was the goal, but it was the idea to be able to step down from working full time and just spend more time with their daughter at home. And it's been working out really nicely.
Yeah, living on your own terms, actually. Yeah.
Especially the part where she spits up 6 ounces of milk.
Oh, yeah. 3 minutes before the podcast. Yes.
Very good. Very good. And then one thing, of course, well, Doug, especially for you, because, okay, you've been retired in 2002. And, you know,
that's right.
The FIRE movement is something, I mean, I've discovered it 4 years ago. That's when I started to read personal finance blogs, etc.
Oh, good.
It's been around for a bit longer, but it's a fairly recent movement. So what sparked the idea of trying to become financially independent as early as possible, or at least where did you find your sources? As well, 2002, it's, I think we got internet connection at home in the late 90s, like 99 or 2000. So I was not very active on looking at financial blogs or whatever. So where did you look for information in 1985, for example?
This feels like back in the early days when woolly mammoths roamed the earth and dinosaurs had just been extinct, and we did this with clay tablets and wooden sticks.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
the reality was that in 1992, after Carol was born, and I started looking around, you know, what can I do? I know I can retire from the military in 10 years, and I don't know what I want to do, but I don't want to do this again. And so I just started spending time in the library and spending time reading everything I could. And in 1993, a book was published in America that today everybody says is a classic. But back in 1993, when it came out, everybody looked at it and said, this is a little strange. And the name of the book is Your Money or Your Life. And it was written by Joe Dominguez and Vicki Robin. And we all know Vicki Robin today. Joe had reached financial independence in the 1960s, over 50 years ago.
Wow.
And he and Vicki had connected later on and started giving talks to small groups. They had actually put out audio cassettes that you could listen to in the 20th century version of a podcast.
Do you know what's a radio cassette, Carol?
I actually know what those are. Unfortunately, there are many aspects of my job in the military where I have to actually use an audio cassette. So there's a lot of dinosaur technology that I've unfortunately had to learn to use just in case.
So that was going on in the 70s and 80s. And when that book came out in 1993, Marge and I read it, and we knew that was a big piece of the puzzle that was missing. And like you, we didn't really have internet connection. We didn't really get onto the World Wide Web until the mid-90s, I guess, probably around 95, 96. And by then, the next book came out, The Millionaire Next Door. And Tom Stanley was marketing to rich people. He had a pretty good handle on how to do that. And he began wondering, how do these people turn into millionaires? And once again, we realized that if we kept up our high savings rate, that we were going to be on that track in American or in euros, American dollars or euros, to reach that millionaire status, to be financially independent. But more importantly, we didn't need a lot of money to live the lifestyle we were already enjoying. So those two books in the 90s made me realize what we could do, what we could achieve. Now, at the time, I was scared to leave active duty and go to the reserves or to get out of the military completely. And as we got to the later 90s, I had a job that was a better job than I'd had before. I was in a place in the military at a training command, and I really liked being an instructor. And so life was not too bad, and I stayed until 20 years. But those two books gave us the power to realize that what we really wanted to do was save money, invest, and have more control over our careers. Maybe we're going to take a different career. Maybe we're going to keep on working. Maybe we're going to completely retire. In my case, back in 2002, I wanted to spend a few months with family, and 18 years later, I'm still enjoying doing that.
Yeah, that's excellent. And you, Carol, I mean, okay, you've obviously been raised by Doug, but did you read any books, or did you get inspired yourself to retire early in another way than...
The short answer is no. The long answer is Dad didn't find out the answer was no until we started writing the book. What had happened was, as a kid, Dad is always voraciously reading. I mean, he's the kind of person that has 12 books stacked up on the side table next to his chair. And I could never keep up with that pace. I was a modern American child. There was video games, there was playing outside, there was watching TV, there was all this other important stuff. And so there were many, many years where Dad would say, hey, I think you should read this book. And it was Your Money or Your Life, The Millionaire Next Door. There was a couple of books on habits and things like that. And I never read them. But what did work was that Dad would also give me 1 or 2 page magazine or internet articles. He would actually print it out from the internet. And a lot of them were about money. I remember I actually still have a couple of those articles. One magazine talked about your portfolio allocations. So when you're 20, it should look like this. When you're 30, it should look like this. When you're 40, 50, 60, and so on. And then other articles would be things about, this is what consumers spend their money on when it comes to cars or when it comes to clothes. And it was easier for me to digest those 1 to 2 page articles instead of, hey, here's a 300 page book for you to read.
Oh, wow. Yeah, indeed. We are, 300 pages or 1 page article. Well, I think the choice is made because there's those video games or whatever.
Exactly. There are more important things to the kid. Yeah,
exactly. And Doug, what was your strategy then to reach, to save all that money, to be able to retire at a young age? Was it investing in the stock markets, in the low-cost index funds? Was it investing in stocks or real estate? How did you manage to save all that money?
Well, we mostly lived a frugal lifestyle. And people have picked up the impression from the media, The Guardian or CNBC or Yahoo Finance, that when you're trying to save for financial independence, that you're making these tremendous sacrifices. You're dumpster diving for your food, you're recycling toilet paper, you're wearing used clothes until they will fall off your body.
You live in the basement of your parents and this kind of
thing. Oh,
things.
great technique. Yeah. Living in basements. Yeah. You found out my secrets. No, but that's not the way it works. When you're frugal, it's challenging and fulfilling. You're optimizing your lifestyle. You're spending your money where it gives you the most value for the things that you enjoy doing. And it feels like winning. And so my spouse and I, we're both a dual income couple for most of our careers. And so we tried to save as much as we could. We managed to keep up a savings rate of at least 40% for most of 2 decades. It was rocky sometimes, but we saved as much as we could because we were frugal and mindful of our spending. That high savings rate, that made all the difference. Now, we invested in the typical stuff that you could get in America in the 1980s and 1990s. Mutual funds mostly. And back then they were expensive. You had high expense ratios and active management and all the urban legends of how you were supposed to invest back then. If I was starting over today, I would just do it in a passively managed index fund with low expense ratios. But we did keep an asset allocation that was high in stocks and equities. And we did that because we were pretty sure that at least one of us was going to have a job the whole time. We were pretty sure that we had highly reliable employment. And so keeping equities for that 20 years when I was on active duty, we continued that in retirement because I have a military pension. And so you have a little bit of income coming in every month, a real reliable annuity payment like longevity insurance. You can be more aggressive with the rest of your portfolio. So even today, we're still greater than 95% equities, and I see that continuing. Our portfolio has grown very well over the last 18 years. You probably know from the math of the 4% safe withdrawal rate that if you're invested aggressively, that most of the time you end up with more money than you need, and that's what's happened to us.
Okay. And Carol, do you follow the exact same strategy then, or when did you start?
So there's a couple of different strategies. Technically, I started around age 10 or 11 when I gave $100 of my money to Dad and we played around with stocks. But that's not that's not real. That was just me giving my allowance money to Dad. I would say the true starting age was age 14. That's the youngest legal age that you can work in the state of Hawaii. And so that's when I was able to open a Roth IRA and I could actually start putting money into my Roth IRA.
Okay.
And then from there, I could choose, I had my IRA with T. Rowe Price at the time. So I could choose different mutual funds within T. Rowe Price's offerings that I could invest that money in. Now, as things happened over the years, I grew up and then I was legally 18. So I was able to move that whole Roth IRA from T. Rowe Price over to Fidelity. And that opened up a whole new bunch of options as well.
Okay. So then you've been investing for almost 15 years.
pretty much. So Dad has a lot of people will find out about financial independence and the whole concept of it in their 20s and 30s. But I had a slight advantage that I had known about it since I was about, well, not financial independence, but I'd known about frugality and I'd known about investing since I was 10. So like you said, I had that extra decade on top of everybody else that I could work towards.
Yeah. But then in a way, it's quite good news, because then that means that, let's say somebody is 30 and listening, or even 40, then, I mean, you still have time to build, to start and build a solid portfolio and retire still earlier than the traditional age, which is 65, 67 here. Or I guess it's similar age in the US, but yes, so you can still start today.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And it's not when you start that's important. It's how long you spend on it. And, the best time to start would have been when we were all 12 years old. But the second best time to start is today. And if you have a high savings rate, you can reach financial independence. Most people do it in about 20 years. I mean, I know extreme savers who will reach financial independence in less than 10 years. And I know other people who do it in 25 or 30 years.
Mm-hmm. And even now, I mean, now it's at time of recording, we are facing this coronavirus. The stock market tanked. We are in a bear market. Would you still say, well, it's a good time to start investing?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, this is an awesome time to start investing. Oh yeah. So for my family personally, we heard the coronavirus happened, and then the economy started tanking. We're like, yes, everything is on sale. There is nowhere to go but up. Even if it goes down further, we can put more money into this. And so what we actually did is our bank came out with, hey, we've heard everybody's lost their jobs. They're having unemployment issues. We're going to give everybody a deal. You can withdraw your CDs early, penalty free. We'll give you everything that's in your CD. And we're just like, heck yeah, we'll take all these CDs and put them right into the stock market.
I guess Carol's pretty thoroughly covered what you do if you're still saving for financial independence. I don't have anything to add to that. And when you're in financial independence, the math of the 4% safe withdrawal rate, all the simulations and assumptions that go into that computer study, that's exactly what is supposed to happen during a recession. The math is intended to give you enough in assets that even if there is a recession, that your portfolio will have enough to survive. And so it's always distressing to be starting financial independence, or, you quit your job just 2 or 3 months ago and suddenly there's a gigantic recession. Mm-hmm. But the reality is you have enough money to get through these and you should be just fine. And if you stay invested in your asset allocation, then you'll pull through and you'll go climbing back up the other side. So this is actually a very good time to be financially independent. And I would tell people that are struggling financially during this time of your life, there's really 2 ways to go through the rest of your life from here. One way is when you're living paycheck to paycheck and trying to struggle with debts and a consumer lifestyle, and this is what happens in a recession. Or the other side is where you're being frugal, you're saving, you're investing, trying to get that high savings rate and saving for financial independence. And when the bear market comes along, you're much more resilient. You've got a much better safety factor.
Okay, because I was thinking, well, Doug, you have this portfolio, but now the value has dropped significantly, probably 20%, or I don't know, maybe 15. So it's quite a huge drop, and so you're not stressed about it.
No, in fact, when we reached financial independence, and we didn't reach it, we reached it in 1999, but we didn't realize it at the time. And then I retired in 2002. And we stayed invested aggressively, that greater than 95% stocks. And so it grew very well. Now, we went through a recession at the end of 2002. We went through the financial Great Recession in 2008, 2009. But our portfolio had grown very quickly up until that point. Very volatile, right? Big swings. Yeah. And it grew again during the last 11 years of the bull market. Now, a year ago, I was looking at it and saying, this is ridiculously high. This just seems stupidly excessive.
Yeah.
This is too much. Yeah. But the reality was we had more money than we needed. And when the stock market goes up 30% in 2019, you know that you're not going to see that happen again for a while. And sure enough. And so we've dropped 25% from that peak of 2019. But a lot of it's come back. The whole point is we had more money than we needed last year. We still have more money than we need, and that's going to continue for the rest of our lives. We haven't had to make any changes to our financial lifestyle. Of course, we're not traveling in Europe this year right now. We're staying at home. I'm not surfing as much as I wish I could, but we're not worried about the money. We're not stressed over our financial security.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great place to be. And Doug, I read a few of your posts on your website, The Military Guide, and there's something that you repeat often, is that when you invest, there are 3 factors you can control.
Yep. The only 3 things you really can control, right, is the amount of money you save, your asset allocation, and the expense ratios you pay for that asset allocation. Those are absolutely under our control. Mm-hmm. Everything else that we think we might be able to control or might have some influence over, that's not right. You can't really control your investments with timing through a recession or a bear market. You can try to time the market, bull market, right? You can say, well, this bull market is stupidly high, I'm going to sell. And I knew a lot of people that were doing that in 2016, 17, and 18.
They missed out as well.
Yes, exactly. And they're very sad now. From the American stock market, the current levels of the stock market look like about 2016, 2017. Mm-hmm. So people that were selling out then to sit on the sidelines and wait for values to return to something more affordable or more of a discount, well, they've just missed out on 3 years of gigantic returns, and they can buy back into the stock market where they got out 3 or 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like losing time. Yeah,
exactly. Don't try to time the market. Just focus on the things you can control, that amount of money you put in and your savings rate, mm-hmm. your asset allocation, and your expense ratio.
Okay, very good. And then I have a question because, you were living a frugal lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that was popular because in Hawaii, when you grew up, for example, Carol, I don't know if that was popular among your friends, if you had already the frugal habits. I mean, you mentioned video games and whatever entertainment. I don't know. So then were you already frugal yourself at 10 years old or as a teenager? Or were you still like a regular teenager, let's say, and didn't care about all these things, but just being a bit of a nerd with with the investing in the stock markets?
And it's a yes and no answer. I think a lot of what people consider rich is relative to the community that you grew up in, the neighborhood that you grew up. And so, mom and dad raised me in a generally middle, slightly upper middle class situation. We live in suburbia. If there is such a thing in Hawaii, we do live in suburbia. And so a lot of the kids around me can afford brands. And there are kids that wear brand names, and there are kids that carry expensive purses and backpacks and hats and shoes and clothes and cars and bikes. And the list can keep going. I mean, there's always going to be some kind of craze. There are a couple of things that made me stand out. One is that I was very different from everybody else ethnically. Mom and dad we're all white, and Hawaii is very much a lot of Asian and Pacific Islander. So when it comes to clothing sizes in stores, that's never in my size. But if you go to the thrift shops, and you can find things in your size, because that's all the rejected clothing because no one else could figure out how to fit it. But it fit for me. I think the only thing that clothing wise I really bought new was underwear, always, of course, and then shoes. Shoes were the other things I could always find new. And then when it came to possessions, one of the things, because I started with an allowance at such a young age, I got to appreciate early the diminishing effect of happiness when you bring something home. I mean, it looks so good when you're in a department store and you see those bright lights and those clean shelves and the brand new packaging, and it's all lined up neatly in a row. And you get to be that one kid that can actually pull it down from the shelf and take it home. But then when you take it home, now you got to dust it. Now you got to clean it. You got to put the batteries into it. You got to make sure you keep track of it, because I can't remember where I put it last. I can't remember if I loaned it to a friend to borrow. And after a while, stuff just accumulates. It just has that diminishing happiness to it. And because I had started with an allowance at age 4, and I knew that effect over, between ages 4 and 16, I could appreciate that if I bought something just a little bit cheaper, I wouldn't feel so bad about the money that I'd lost, but I'd still get the equal amount of happiness.
Yeah, I remember these conversations. You're in the store with your parents, and I don't know, let's say you're 8 or 9 years old. You see, I think for me it was like cars, like that you can pilot, or a radio guided with a remote control.
Those are good.
Let's say, for example, and then I mean, it's fictive. I don't remember exactly, but I would say something like, "Hey, I like this car. Can I have it?" And then my dad or my mom would say, "Yeah, but then we need to buy batteries and this and that." "Yeah, no, it's okay. I don't care." Or you need to charge it, whatever. "No, I don't care. Let's have it." You really want that thing, that toy, or maybe later it's goods or clothing. no, it's okay. I want this T-shirt. Yeah, it doesn't matter about the size and this and that. No, it's okay. I'll wear it. I will love it. And then it's true that after maybe even 1 week, you're tired of it, or something doesn't work, or it's not exactly what you wanted. And yeah. But, you know,
Exactly.
when you're, usually people don't think like that as a young kid or as a teenager. So that's kind of funny. So I don't know if Doug, how did you raise Carol? I mean, how did you instill or educate the money savvy part for your kids?
Well, again, they're going to make their management skills from all the mistakes they make as they learn to manage their money. So you'll sit there and talk with them about it and see if they're really interested in it, or if it's just a short, intense burst of some kind of infatuation with that toy, that idea. And then you'll talk through their feelings. And eventually, as you talk through their feelings, they understand how they feel and what's normal and what's different. And they realize that their emotions are manipulated by the stores or by the advertising. And as they go on, they realize what's important to them, what they're really willing to work for. And you might have heard this yourself when you wanted something as a teenager. Your parents would say, well, you're going to have to spend your own money for that. Mm-hmm. And that's when you realize you've got to spend your life energy to get this toy or this wonderful thing. And you realize how much you're going to have to work to make that happen. And that's when you figure out what your values are and what your emotions are. Again, it's better to have kids start at a young age, learning from making these mistakes and making those mistakes over and over and over again at home in a place where it's safer and where you're loved and you're secure, and to work through all that and get better at it before you leave the house and start trying to make your way in the world. And so Carol did exactly that. She made a tremendous number of mistakes at home. We parents made our share of mistakes as well, but we all kept talking through it and learning from it. And so by the time she was in high school, by the time she went to college, I think you were able to tell that there were other people that were less skilled, less experienced than you were by then. Is that right, Carol?
Oh yeah, and it was very different, especially when you go to college, because you see people from different communities all over the country and all over the world. So it's very interesting to see how different people approach stuff and what they found to buy, what they found a value in physically, and what they found value in, whether it's something electronic like a TV or maybe even a subscription service instead. It was very interesting to see how people valued things differently.
Mm-hmm. And then did you have conversations with your friends when you were a teenager? And they thought you were weirdo, basically, because you were using these words, these expressions, such as life energy and so on.
Well, if you don't mind me feeling this one, Dad, for Dad, that wasn't really something in his time period. You know, when he was a teenager, he wasn't really talking about financial independence yet. But for me as a teenager, that's when financial independence really did start kicking off. And so that was the time period where I did sound weird, because I was that kid that was walking around with the checkbook. You know, after the age of 13, I was that kid that had the credit card. I was that kid that could talk about, you know, the stock market, and I could talk about mutual funds, and I could talk about return on investment. And everyone's sitting over here like, and your parents give you money? It's like, yeah, I get an allowance, but I also get a budget for my food, and I get a budget for my clothing, I get a budget for gas. And they're just like, wait, you get a budget? What do you mean by it? And it just went downhill from there. And so after a while, I just learned not to talk about money unless people explicitly ask me a question. You know, hey, what do your parents do for your allowance? Oh, they do this, this, and this. Okay, what is that? Well, they do this. And so that became easier to just answer the question than it was to just talk about it at large.
One of the things that took a while for families like us parents and other families to understand is that it's not that we gave Carol a big dump truck full of money and said, go manage this. What we did is we started small, and the money that she was learning to manage was the money that it would have cost to raise her anyway. Instead of my wife and I being in charge of figuring out what clothing she would wear for her entire life growing up in our house, we started giving her more and more choices over that. And we started letting her control the money that went into her clothing budget. And then we started letting her run the money that went into her grocery budget and her bicycle transportation budget and her entertainment budget. And so the money that we would have spent on raising her anyway, as the years went on, she got more and more control over that and learned to manage larger and larger sums of money along the way. And so by the time she was a teenager, she was managing more money than most teens do, and she was making mistakes with it, but she was also getting very skilled in it and not intimidated and not worried about it.
Okay, that's a great place to be, and I like to hear that. one thing, the teenage years or the rebel years. So did you have any moment where you said, oh, well, screw this, I'm going to spend my money how I want, or I don't know, I'm fed up with this plan?
There was not necessarily a rebellion, so to speak. There was a couple of times where I came very close to overspending my money, but that was more of a lack of management than it was trying to stick it to my mom and dad. I recognized that personal finance was personal at a young age, and I was going to reap the consequences no matter what. It didn't matter whether or not I was trying to, rebel against mom and dad. It was my consequences to suffer. So if I overspent my credit card, well, guess who was going to have to do the extra chores to be able to get that money back for the credit card? And if I didn't use my allowance properly, well, mom and dad were just going to let me be a stinky teenager. I was just going to have to learn how to deal with that.
I think the most interesting example was the cell phone. We did not appreciate the cell phone one little bit.
No, but that's a good story. Mom and dad had grown up in a lifestyle where the Navy is on call 24/7. And at some point, they were actually given cell phones in the 90s and the early 2000s that they could literally be on call 24/7. And so for mom and dad, cell phones were always a work tool. They were always something that you had to have because something could go wrong at any moment. But for me being a teenager, cell phones were social. Cell phones were about meeting up for group projects. They were about meeting up for after school hangouts. They were about being able to put your plans together for the weekend so you could go hang out at the beach together. And so for me, I had a more positive view of cell phones. But because mom and dad saw them as a work tool and I didn't necessarily need them for the after school jobs that I had, then they weren't going to fund a cell phone for me. So when I got my first job, one of the first things I did was I bought my own pay-as-you-go cell phone, and it was 10 cents a minute and 25 cents a text. And I made it very clear to all the people that I would interact with that I was not going to pay for chain text. I was not going to pay for scam calls. Like I only have so much money and I would love to hang out with you guys, but I cannot afford texting and hanging out with you guys. And so it worked out nicely in that eventually mom and dad came around to the idea of, oh, cell phones are a social thing nowadays. And that's really the overall transition that the world had was cell phones went from being a corporate marketing and a job tool to becoming more of a social tool.
And the other thing we didn't appreciate for a very long time is that the cell phone was an essential school tool. Carol would have these meetings with her group projects, or the teacher would be giving some extra help, and they would be coordinating these meetings by cell phone, by texts. And if she didn't have a phone, she was out of the loop, and she would usually miss out.
Okay. And are these anecdotes part of your book, actually?
Absolutely. We tell these stories in a book. We tell our story from our parents' side, and then Carol tells us how it really worked out from her perspective. Sometimes we nailed it. Sometimes it was a very good lesson and it was very effective. Other times, not so much. And this is what parenting is like. You try the things that you think will work, and sometimes they work, and sometimes they don't.
So what was the main reason for writing the book?
I kept getting these questions. I know you might have heard a little bit about this story, but I've been going to financial conferences for a long time, over a decade. And my wife and I started going to small meetups over weekends. In America, there's Camp FI and another one called Camp Mustache. I would talk at those conferences about different parts of financial independence. I'd talk about how to save for it. I'd talk about lifestyle. And at some point, somebody would raise their hands and say, I understand. I get it. But how did you raise your kids to get these skills? How did you teach your kids to be smart with their money? And the first couple of times I got the question, I just kind of babbled an answer and got through the discussion without really having a lot to talk about. And then in 2017, we had it happen again at a conference. And my wife turned to me after I'd finished answering the question, and she said, Nords, you got to write that book. And so we came back. We were visiting our daughter and our son-in-law at the time. And so we came back to their apartment from this financial conference, and we were sitting around dinner. And I said, hey, I got that question again at the financial conference, Carol. It was that one about how to raise a kid that's smart with money. And do you have any stories that really resonated with you? Do you have any memories that really hit it with you for raising a money-savvy kid?
A 15-page outline later.
Yeah, she was off and running. She had quite a bit on her mind about that. And so by the end of the dinner, we had an outline, and a couple of days later, she started writing.
Oh, well, that's a great family project, actually.
It is. I've tremendously enjoyed this. It turns out she's the better writer. She's got the story, and it's a very compelling set of stories. And the fact that we do it back and forth, telling both sides of the same story, helps parents understand what the kid's perspective on this is, because you have to do this with a way that the child will understand and make that an internal incentive. I'm sure you've gone through this where you've sat there and told your kids this is the way it has to be, and you shake your finger at them and admonish them, and maybe they'll listen to you, maybe they won't. But if it becomes an incentive that they own, that they want to make work, if it's their life energy, if it's their rewards, they'll get it. They'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's great. And Carol and Doug, we have come at the end of the show. Thanks so much. I think it was very insightful. And I think the tips and the stories will help people reaching financial independence. And before we close, we always have this questions, the 3 quick fire questions.
All right.
And the first question is, ladies first, so Carol first. What has been your best investment so far?
Oh man, it's been pretty much, honestly, it's been the investment in my marriage. It's been me and my husband and everything that we do together.
Oh.
That's been pretty good.
Oh, that's good. I never heard that one, so that's excellent.
Those two really like each other. It's fun to watch.
Okay, that's great. And Doug, what has been your best investment?
Over the last 40 years, the best investment I've had yet is the total stock market index fund with an expense ratio of 0.03%. I haven't had anything that good. That's right. That's been our best investment.
Okay. Even through the coronavirus times, it's still a recommendation.
Absolutely. It's volatile, right?
Yeah.
But it also gives you 99.97% of the stock market for a fraction of a percent of the effort.
Okay, excellent. And then the second question, we already talked about some books, so I have an idea of which one, but I always ask the guests, what is the favorite book? Your favorite book you can recommend to anyone. It does not need to be financial. So, Carol?
I'm a sucker for the Harry Potter series. I would always say, go read the Harry Potter series. Yes, I'm a big fan of the way J.K. Rowling framed out that book series and the way that she went about writing it. Because it's a great story, and to hear all the work that she did in the background to make that story great is also fascinating.
Mm-hmm. And I've read not every book, but I've read the first one and then the 3 last ones.
Oh yeah,
and you really see the evolution. Huh? So it's
oh yeah.
Entering into the complexity of the personalities, etc., and the story itself. It's quite great. I like the evolution as well. And you, Doug?
Well, your money or your life. We talked about that earlier, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Life changing.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then the last question is, what is the best purchase you've made for under $100? Carol?
Once upon a time, when I was in middle school, there used to be this after-school stand that had all these kinds of little, what is it called, like school supplies. And it used to have things like pencils and pens and so on and so forth. I found a little stapler. It was about this long, and it could completely fold flat. And it was something that made me realize how different things could be. So I don't think I paid more than $15 for it, but I was the kid that had the stapler in my backpack, and everyone's like, "What stapler?" "Oh, this stapler. It looks like a half deck of cards, and it's small enough that you could carry around." But it came in handy a lot of times.
Okay, excellent. And I wouldn't think of that, but okay, that's great. That's why I'm asking these questions. And you, Doug, do you have a purchase under $100?
It's well under $100. It's about €1, and it's a cake of surf wax. And this is going to sound a little silly. Yeah, you're already laughing. But every time I get out a piece of surf wax and start waxing down my board, I get this big goofy smile on my face because I know that I'm going to go out there and start having fun on the waves. And so just seeing and smelling that surf wax and getting it on the board, it brings me a great joy even before I paddle out.
Well, that's maybe the best return on investment you ever made.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, excellent. That's excellent. And guys, Doug, where can people find out more about you?
Well, I'm online at The Military Guide, and it's easy to use a search engine. Just search for The Military Guide. We've been doing this for 10 years now, so we're pretty high up on the search engine rankings. Or search for my name, Doug Nordman. You'll come right across The Military Guide. And that's the first book that I've written, and we'll eventually come out with a second edition for that. It's about military personal finance for military families, U.S. military families. The secret is that the math works the same for civilians as it does for military.
Yeah.
But please don't tell my readers that. They might read other books.
Very good. And you, Carol, where can people find out more about you?
So the website is under heavy construction right now, but it's called childfire.com. It's teaching kids about financial independence early, so childfire.com. And then, like Dad said, I'm also on Facebook. I'm running around a lot of the groups as well, and you can find me by name on Facebook.
Okay, very good. And anyway, I'll link all the information in the show notes. So that's good, so the listeners can find you as well. And yeah, guys, thanks so much for joining the show today. I think it was very good. So I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time and for connecting from so far with such a time difference. It was a pleasure. And thanks again.
I really appreciate it. Talk to you later.
Okay, see you. Had a really great time speaking to Doug and Carol on the podcast. I think it was a great episode. So I hope you enjoyed it as well and that you learned something from it. And yeah, before we close off, here are the key takeaways for today. So number one, we talked about early retirement with Doug, and what he had to say is that if your job is fulfilling, there might be no great reason to retire as such, actually. You can stay at your current occupation for a few more years. Do not pursue retirement because you're unhappy with your current situation, for example. Don't forget that if you retire, you have to retire to something. You will become responsible of your time and you will have to design your life. And next, I really like that one about adopting a frugal lifestyle. And Doug puts it well. He said, well, it does not mean recycling toilet paper, living in your parents' basements, and other money hacks, let's say. I mean, frugality is about optimizing your lifestyle and spending your money intentionally. And on investing, everyone can start investing to become financially independent, and it typically takes 20-25 years, depending on your savings rate. And yes, the current pandemic should not be a showstopper for you to start investing in the stock markets. And on that note, there are 3 factors you can control when investing. That's your savings rate, your asset allocation, and your expense ratio. And the last tip from Doug, which is something we've been talking about before on the podcast, namely with the poor Swiss, is not to try to time the market. Next, moving on to the raising kids part. So how to make your kids money savvy. Here are a few tips. I really like that anecdote when Doug cut out some snippets of a newspaper and gave them to Carol when she was a teenager. Instead of giving her a book, maybe a good way is to, do the same. Print out articles which are short, show maybe a small video on social media. I mean, that's how it is these days. So make it easy for them to absorb some financial information. Another great tip to educate your kids about money is to give them an allowance. And this is what helped Carol understand the diminishing effect of happiness from a purchase from a young age already. I think one of the key advice here from Doug is to keep an open dialogue with your kids, talk through their feelings about purchases and how their emotions are manipulated through advertising, for example. Allow your kids to make mistakes, allow yourself to make mistakes, you will make them too, and allow them to make mistakes from a safe place, from your home, before they go into the outside world. Keep talking about the experiences and let them learn from it. And I will just end up with something Doug mentioned in the episode, is that your kid needs to make managing money an internal incentive. If it becomes their reward, their life energy, and if they want to make it work, they'll get it and they will figure it out. So that was it for today. Thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot to me. Make sure you subscribe in Apple Podcast. And of course, please do not hesitate to contact me. If you have any questions or feedback, send me an email, john@johnnytalks.com, or connect through social media at Johnny Talks on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And amigos, once more, thanks so much for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.